Agree. Thank you, Natalie. I thank you all for coming and to join me in this presentation. And during the next 20 minutes, a little bit more maybe, I will try to give you an overall perspective of what my research project it's about. As Natalie said, I am working on northern Chile in the impact of copper mining on the local communities. And I like the idea of having a subtitle, a story beyond global perspective. We have been listening, seeing, and discussing about the energy transition in a global scale, but most of the discussions missed or is not include, and I said, the often forgotten local narratives of the energy transition. So my thesis try to address that using different environmental matrices or environmental techniques to develop the local story of mining pollution in the environment, in both in the spatial scale, but also, as Natalie said, with 3 rings in the temporal, the time scale. So I am going to talk about 3 methods I applied, very simple one, and I will focus at the second part of the presentation in what I promised, 3 rings and temporal variability of metals in the environment. But also, I will take the opportunity that you are joining me here to present you the local perspectives. Not just mine, as a researcher or as a student, also the people who are living in this territory. So in a few minutes, after a little introduction, I am going to introduce to you the faces, the stories, and the conflict, but from the local scale, not me as in the middle. So as Natalie said too, I am Nicolás Zanetta Colombo. I am Chilean geographer and currently, or during the last actually 4 years, doing my PhD in geography here in Heidelberg University, and hopefully close to finish it during the next month. So let's start with a little bit of context. I think, yeah, perfect. So, as you might know, Chile holds a commanding position in the global copper market, being the largest producer of this, they call it cross-cutting mineral, that is crucial, essential for the energy transition. Last year, in 2022, Chile produced 27% of the global copper demand, generating approximately 200,000 tons, but also accounting for 21% of the worldwide reserve, of the global reserves. So now, with this 2-degree scenario, the projections indicate a remarkable 350% increase in copper production is going to be necessary to meet the estimated demand of 29 million tons by 2050. So this situation is not free of tension, and that's why I'm focusing this in the local scale. So if we consider Chile as just a regional scale, maybe copper has been the key driver for economic growth on both national and also a regional scale. But the majority, most of the Chile's copper mining activity are concentrated in the northern Chile, as you can see here in the map. Hopefully you are seeing my mouse here. But also not just intersecting, that's logic, copper mining industry with tailing dams, but also intersecting very often with local indigenous communities. So within this shift toward, as the shift toward a clean energy gains somehow momentum, or we are reaching it, there's question about what is going to be the impact, no? If today we consider this conflict right now in today's as a base, what can we expect, no? How this transition can be a detrimental effect on indigenous territories. So as I said, now let me introduce you the real faces and concern of the people living in this territory. So I will invite you for a couple of minutes to travel with me to Chile, and specifically to Alto Eloa, near to Calama, the hotspot of copper mining in the country, and probably in Latin America. So what I'm going to show you now is a little teaser of a documentary we are trying to film with, of course, a lot of intention, but not real money. And what we are doing this, no, because for sure we are trying to do a good research, but sometimes this kind of studies always reach the people who are going to write again, or maybe actually you can reference to your own papers, and the impact somehow and sometimes is not very high in terms of the people who need to understand this to change or to make decision to change the reality of some peoples, and also, for example, to try to get to other communities that maybe are facing this and don't have the tool, or people in the surroundings trying to understand a little bit more in terms of chemistry, in terms of science, what is happening there.
Junto al río que riega su
Perfect,
planta,
perfect.
se alza.
Now it's working, thank you.
Calama es una ciudad olvidada.
Junto al río que riega su planta, se alza altiva esta bella ciudad, y es el loa que siempre nos canta.
Estas cañerías tienen la responsabilidad de haber secado uno de los afluentes del río Salado.
El viento que va hacia la cordillera lleva la contaminación hacia el Alto Loa, a los pueblos que están hacia allá.
Es un polvillo que no se ve, como unas nubes, así.
Yo cuando llegué aquí hace 18 años, cada 2 meses veía un niño con autismo, por ejemplo. Es una cosa excepcional. Hoy día lo veo todos los días.
Calama es un ejemplo salvaje de contaminación, de precariedad también.
La mayor cantidad de minera está acá, en Calama.
Lo que hoy día se conoce como el tranque de Relaves de Talabre era un salar.
Allá en Alemania le pintan como que tenemos las medias mansiones, de que tenemos sistemas de salud así privilegiados, que acá no se sufre nada.
Yo siento que la tecnología hoy día existe. La creatividad humana puesta frente a un problema busca las soluciones. Pero acá siento que siempre se corta por la vía más fácil, ¿no? Extraer y dejar el hoyo y irme después. ¿Qué pasó con las generaciones que estaban ahí? Poco importa.
I'm glad that works. Give me 1 second now to make the arrangement. Now you are seeing the presenter mode, no?
Yes, we see the
Yeah. Yeah, sorry for the waste of time. Okay, so yeah, the work that we have been doing until now somehow connect or is linked to what communities perceive. Now, in this paper we published last year using dust sample from the local communities here, indigenous communities, we found out that the concentration of some elements like arsenic, copper, antimony, and others are very close related to the emissions, at least from using air transport model, might be coming from mining operation, but specifically from the tailing dam. The tailing dam here that you can see and was showed in the teaser is 66 square kilometers, is 3 times bigger than the main city that you saw in the teaser. So it's the dimensions of the industry in this area is massive. And using very normal, very common health risk models, we found out, for example, that for arsenic, all communities already, 2022, pose a risk to generate non-carcinogenic and here carcinogenic risk or diseases in terms of chronic ingestion by children. So I do this emphasis in this is the current scenario. And moreover, in a paper is in peer review right now using soil samples within the Alto Loa area in terms of it's like a regional scale. It's not just in the city. This is the entire area of the indigenous territory. We found out also that, for example, for copper and arsenic, the hotspot of activities, and considering the open pits here as a yellow and an orange triangle, but also the tailing dam more close here, more clear here for arsenic, are the sources that somehow influence the spatial distribution of some potentially toxic element. And also, for example, this scatter plot also shows that the influence of, in this case, the tailing dam can be observed until 40 kilometers of distance from the source when meet the regional background and the upper continental crust concentration. And of course, having this in mind that Alto Loa and northern Chile is already rich in arsenic, but this kind of analysis shows that even being rich, metal rich from the geology itself, the mining activity are a good influencer of this distribution in the environment. And of course, also here, doing the comparison with international guidelines, soil concentration up to 40 kilometers of distance from the source are well above those concentrations that are considered safe. So considering this, I will say, critical situation of Alto Loa and probably most of the mining areas in northern Chile, and considering again the current situation, what can we expect from a increased production, increase in the area of the tailing, and that is projected during the next decades if we don't change nothing or if there is no better measures or better conscious activities. And here's where, for example, also, no, probably you might better, better the lake sediment. Tree rings can play as a witnesses of environmental changes resulting from anthropogenic activities, but also, of course, metal extraction. This is probably something that you already know, but after deposition, trees can absorb metals from leaves, from bark, and from roots, mainly from roots and leaves. And they can storage them within the tree annual ring growth. And detecting and analyzing or assessing the variability of these metals within the years of the tree, also linked to pollution triggers, as we saw copper production in time and the availability of dry tailing material can help or allow us to assess how sustainable or the sustainability of past mining activities, and for sure to estimate or try to project what can be the future consequences. So first, we can focus in the pollution triggers. In this case, the copper production in time locally in Alto El Loa. Here I'm showing the copper production in Caton from the 60s until today. And you can doing this regime shift or trying to identify where are abrupt changes that might influence later the variability of metals in the environment. We can see 4, or we can statistically identify 4. And very close to economic and political factors in Chile. For example, in the 70s, the first regime shift was associated to the nationalization of copper and the establishment of Codelco, that is the copper corporation or copper national corporation. And both situations, both events boost the copper production locally and also nationally in the mid-70s. But then in the 90s, and this is the period more interesting for us, at least in this moment, you can see also two regime shifts in the late 80s and in the mid-90s, and the last one being one of the biggest, or the biggest actually, in the trend we are analyzing here. And in the early 2010s, there is the last regime shift, but it's the only one that is negative. I mean, the copper production start to decrease after the peak here in 2004. And the other pollution trigger, local pollution trigger we identify in previous work is the tailing dam. As I told you, the tailing dam, Talabre tailing dam today is 66 square kilometers. And like we did for the copper production here, we identify 3 regime shifts or abrupt changes within the period on analyze, from 85 to today. The first one is close related to what was happening in the copper production, and that's quite logic because, of course, more production require or generate more waste and a big area to dispose this material. So there is a huge correlation, a positive and strong correlation between copper production and the size on the tailing dam, and specifically here, the dry tailing area. That is the factor that we are more interested in, because dry material in the surface and together with the strong winds in the Atacama Desert allows the resuspension of material or dust rich in toxic elements like arsenic and travel, as we saw, even until 40 kilometers of distance, or is observed in 40 kilometers of distance. But then the second and the third regime shift in the dry tailing area looks like decoupled to copper production and probably more related to changes in the management of the tailings, no? And even if in the Talabre tailing dam there is currently no recovering of water in terms of like measurement or a long time measure, from the 2000s until today, there has been a lot of tests. Some other tailings in Chile already are recovering huge amount of water from the tailings, but in the tailing dam in Talabre, in my study area, there's only has been tests during the last 2 decades. So now the idea is to see how this regime shift or abrupt changes in the local pollution triggers we identified in the previous papers or in the previous studies can affect the variability of metals in the environment through the analysis of tree rings. So yeah, probably this plot is not quite, it's full of things to see, but let me try to guide you through this. So as we saw in the previous plots, we identify here in the tree rings two main or two regime shifts, no? Or statistically abrupt changes. And the interesting thing here is that both occurs 2 years after the changes in copper production in the so-called mining boom in the late 80s and the mid 90s. So we can start seeing here that is a relation between abrupt changes in copper production and some changes reflected in the tree rings. But even if they are not identified as a regime shift in terms of statistics, no, after 2 years too, from changes in the dry tailing area, as I told you, decoupled from copper production and more related to maybe changes in the management. Also, you can see some increase in the metals, some metals in the environment. So at the end, what we can see here is that copper production or changes in copper production can have an influence in the long-term trend of metals in the environment, and changes in the dry tailing somehow can modulate this long term that is already influenced by copper production. And if you remember the video I was showing to you early, these two pictures maybe makes you to remember. We were taking sample of dust in 38 schools in Calama, the main city, that is 3 times smaller than the tailing dam, and is 4 to 5 kilometers of distance from one of the vertices, one of the borders. So it's almost there, and it's growing. And we took samples indoor and outdoor from 38 public schools in Calama. And for example, for arsenic and copper, 2 elements that we already discussed, also all samples, all schools in another way, all children in Calama are exposed to concentration of arsenic and copper that are far above the regional background and also far above what internationally is considered safe. Not so much for lead, but yeah, probably 1/3 of the schools are above the limits. And for sulfate, we don't have regional background or international guideline as far as I can tell or found for this matter. So I lost too much time trying to connect properly the audio, so I will take these 3 messages that are very broad, very general, but as simple as they are, sometimes they are missed in the global discussion, no? So I will read that. The new metal revolution and the necessary increase in copper production could lead to an increase in the availability of metals in the environment, similar or even stronger to what happened in the last mining boom of the 90s, as we saw in the Three Rings analysis. And even in northern Chile and in other arid regions where most of the copper mining or mining itself is located, there has been a discussion about the recovery of water from the tailing, from a sustainable perspective to reduce the tensions with local communities for the use of water or groundwater. And if that go in the right direction, might have unintended consequences for the environment and public health, as we saw in the previous slide. So it's not just like, okay, it's not just one measure. Mining impact is a multi-dimensional problem that has to be addressed in a multidisciplinary and in a multi-approach way. And to finish, the energy transition must be discussed beyond the global perspective, and with a zoom in on the often forgotten local scales and narratives as Calama and Alto El Loa. Thank you very much for your attention.